I never thought I'd be the woman telling this story. The one where everything falls apart because I was too busy chasing attention from other men to see what I had at home. I'm Thea, and 6 months ago I told my husband he couldn't handle a woman with options. He packed his bags that night and never came back. I spent years making Kevin feel small. I skipped date nights for drinks with male doctors. I hid texts and lied about where I was. I spent money we didn't have while he paid all our bills. The worst part? I humiliated him in front of my coworkers, joking about our private problems while he sat there trying to smile through it. Now I'm alone in a house I can barely afford, and I've learned the hard truth. Those options I was so proud of were never real. It all started in sophomore year chemistry class. Mr. Daniels paired us up for lab partners. Me and this quiet, kind of cute guy named Kevin. He wasn't the type I usually went for. Not a football player or one of the popular guys. Just this regular guy who worked at his uncle's hardware store after school. But there was something about him. The way he actually listened when I talked. How he'd get this little crease between his eyebrows when he was concentrating on getting our experiments just right. "Hand me the beaker," I'd say, and his fingers would brush against mine. Not like the other boys who would make it obvious, trying to touch my hand on purpose. Kevin was gentler than that, more respectful. We started dating a few months later. It wasn't some epic romantic movie moment. He just asked if I wanted to grab pizza after school, and somehow we never stopped hanging out after that. Kevin was my constant through all the high school drama. While I was bouncing between friend groups and trying to figure out who I was, he was just steady. I liked that about him, at least back then. "You're overthinking it," he'd tell me when I was stressing about which college to apply to or which friends were talking behind my back. "Just be yourself." That's who I fell for. After graduation, we both went to community college. I was going to be a nursing student and he was doing business management. Plans changed. I ended up struggling with the science prerequisites, failing organic chemistry twice before giving up and becoming a medical assistant instead. Kevin got pulled into an entry-level position at a manufacturing company, filing paperwork and hopping to work his way up. My mom never thought Kevin was good enough for me. "He's so plain, Althea," she'd say when he wasn't around. "Don't you want someone more exciting? Someone who can give you the life you deserve?" But I was sure Kevin was it for me. He didn't have the flashiest car or the coolest clothes, but he never missed a single one of my performances when I briefly joined the college dance team. He never forgot a birthday or anniversary. He was there, always there, and it felt like enough. We got married in this tiny ceremony at my parents' backyard when we were 23. Nothing fancy, just close family and friends. My mom kept giving me these looks throughout the ceremony, like she was attending a funeral instead of a wedding. "You're too young," she'd told me the night before. "You need to experience life before settling down. Keep your options open." That word, options. It would come back to haunt me years later. Our first apartment was this cramped one-bedroom with barely functioning AC and neighbors who fought like cats and dogs at 2 a.m., but it was ours. I remember how excited we were arranging our secondhand furniture, planning our future. We'd save for a house, have a couple kids, maybe get a dog. The normal dream, you know? One day, Kevin would say as we lay in bed, the ceiling fan clicking above us, "We'll look back at this place and laugh about how we started out." He'd kiss my forehead and pull me closer. But I kind of hope we never forget how good it feels just being together, even when we don't have much. Looking back, I can see the little signs even then. How Kevin would rather stay in while I was always trying to drag him out to bars with my friends. How I'd get bored when he talked about his 5-year financial plans. How I'd sometimes catch guys checking me out and feel this little thrill, even though I never acted on it. But they seemed like normal differences, the kind every couple has. The first real change came when I got my job at the clinic. Suddenly, I was surrounded by these successful, educated men. Dr. Wilson, Dr. Matthews, Dr. Patel, Dr. Lawson, all of them accomplished, and if I'm being honest, most of them attractive. They treated me differently than Kevin did. They noticed when I got my hair done. They laughed at my jokes. They made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. "You look sharp today, Thea," Dr. Wilson would say, his eyes lingering on my fitted scrubs. That color really brings out your eyes. Kevin hadn't commented on my appearance in months. He was too busy worrying about bills or zoning out in front of the TV after his long shifts. And sure, maybe I didn't put in the same effort at home that I did at work, but shouldn't he notice me anyway? I started forgetting my wedding ring at home. Not every day, just sometimes. I told myself it was because I was washing my hands so much at work, or because it would catch on my gloves. But deep down, I knew. There's something about being perceived as possibly available that changes how men interact with you. And I liked it. No ring today? Dr. Matthews asked once, his voice casual but his eyes curious. Oh, I took it off to wash my hands and forgot to put it back on. I lied, though my hands were perfectly dry. He smiled in a way that told me he saw right through me, and I felt that familiar thrill again. Kevin and I had been married for almost 3 years when I noticed the real shift between us. He had been putting in crazy hours at work, trying to move up from his position to something with better pay. I'd tell him he looked tired, that the stress was aging him. It wasn't meant to be cruel, not at first, just an observation. But I started noticing how the shadows under his eyes deepened, how his hairline was slightly receding, how he'd grown when he got up from the couch like some old man. Meanwhile, I was thriving at work. The doctors all had their favorite medical assistants, and I somehow became everyone's go-to. Dr. Wilson especially seemed to appreciate having me assist with his patients. He'd wink at me when a procedure went well or touch my shoulder when walking past. Nothing inappropriate, at least that's what I told myself. My mom noticed the shift during one of our lunches. You're glowing, she said. Is it a new skincare routine, or is it those handsome doctors you work with? She laughed when I rolled my eyes, but then leaned in closer. You know, marriage doesn't have to be a prison, Thea. Kevin should be grateful he has a wife other men find attractive. It keeps him on his toes. When I repeated this to my friend Jenna, she looked concerned. That's kind of a messed up way to look at marriage, don't you think? It's not about keeping someone anxious about whether you'll stay. But her words didn't stick. My mom's advice felt more natural, more aligned with what I was already feeling. Kevin was too comfortable, too secure. He didn't appreciate what he had because he didn't think he had to work for it anymore. Our 5-year anniversary came and went with a mediocre dinner at Olive Garden and a perfunctory exchange of cards. Kevin got me this silver bracelet I pretended to love but never wore. I got him a watch that was slightly over our budget. He kissed me and said he couldn't believe how lucky he was to have me. I smiled and said I felt the same, but inside I was wondering if this was all there was. If this quiet life with this increasingly familiar man was all I'd ever have. Sometimes I'd catch Kevin looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite place. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like he was wondering who I'd become. Or maybe that's just me projecting now, looking back with the knowledge of what was coming. Because things were about to change. I was about to change. And our nice, normal life was about to implode in ways neither of us could have imagined. Kevin had been putting in crazy hours at his job, trying to move up to a management position. Just a few more months of this pace, he'd promised. Then I'll get the promotion and we can start saving for a house. But months stretched into a year and he was still in the same position, just more exhausted. I tell him he looked tired, that the stress was aging him. It wasn't meant to be cruel, not at first. Just an observation. But I started noticing how the shadows under his eyes deepened, how his hairline was slightly receding, how he'd grown when he got up from the couch. Meanwhile, I was thriving at work. The doctors all had their favorite medical assistants, and I somehow became everyone's go-to. Dr. Wilson especially seemed to appreciate having me assist with his patients. He'd wink at me when a procedure went well or touch my shoulder when walking past. Nothing inappropriate, at least that's what I told myself. My mom noticed the shift during one of our lunches. You're glowing, she said. Is it a new skincare routine or is it those handsome doctors you work with? She laughed when I rolled my eyes but then leaned in closer. You know, marriage doesn't have to be a prison, Thea. Kevin should be grateful he has a wife other men find attractive. It keeps him on his toes. I started spending more and more time with my work friends. Happy hours stretched into dinners. Texts during off hours became normal. I'd be lying in bed next to Kevin, laughing at something Dr. Matthews sent me while Kevin scrolled mindlessly through his phone before falling asleep. Our sex life had basically flatlined. When I tried to initiate, Kevin seemed distracted or too tired. When he tried, I found myself making excuses. I didn't connect these dots at the time, but looking back, I think this was when he started turning to other outlets for intimacy. The bathroom door locked a little too often. The browser history cleared too frequently. I pretended not to notice. The financial dynamic between us shifted too. Kevin was covering most of our bills: mortgage, utilities, car payments. I contributed, but most of my paycheck went to things I wanted. New clothes, skincare, drinks with coworkers, weekend brunches. When Kevin gently suggested a budget, I snapped at him, asking if he was monitoring my spending now. He backed off immediately, that hurt look in his eyes that used to make me feel guilty but now just irritated me. I started seeing Kevin less as a partner and more as an obstacle, an obligation, the background character in my exciting new life. Was that fair? No, but it was how I felt. The early signs of trouble should have been obvious. Kevin stopped asking about my day, stopped trying to make plans for us. When he did ask about work, I'd be vague and dismissive, not because anything inappropriate had happened. It hadn't, not yet, but because I didn't want to share those parts of my life with him. They were mine, my work friends, my fun, my escape. The breaking point of this phase came when Kevin tried to join me at a work happy hour. I didn't explicitly tell him not to come, but I didn't hide my annoyance either. He sat there awkwardly as my colleagues, and I chatted about patients and office politics he couldn't possibly understand. When Dr. Wilson made a joke about how lucky Kevin was to have me, Kevin smiled tightly and said, "I know." But the way he looked at me across that table, I knew something had changed. He was seeing me with new eyes, and I wasn't sure he liked what he saw. The next morning, he tried to talk to me about it. "I felt like I was intruding last night," he said carefully. "Like you didn't want me there." "Don't be ridiculous," I replied, not looking up from my phone. "You're just not used to my work friends, it's fine." But we both knew it wasn't fine. There was a crack in our foundation, and instead of trying to repair it, I was quietly watching it spread. The text started innocently enough. Dr. Wilson would check in about a patient, then the conversation would drift to more personal topics. How was my weekend? Was I enjoying the book he recommended? Had I tried that new restaurant downtown? Kevin never asked me these questions anymore. We were past that stage, I guess. But with Dr. Wilson, I felt seen again. Interesting again. One night, Kevin asked to use my phone to call his mom. His battery had died. I handed it over without thinking, then watched his face change as notifications from Dr. Wilson lit up the screen. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, but the frequency and familiarity were enough. Kevin scrolled through our conversation history, his expression darkening. "What is this?" he asked, his voice unnervingly calm. "What is what?" I countered, immediately defensive. "I'm not allowed to have friends now. Friends don't text each other at midnight, Thea. Friends don't send messages like thinking of you today." I snatched my phone back. "Are you seriously spying on me right now, going through my private conversations? That's a real trust issue, Kevin." "Trust issue." His voice cracked slightly. "You're having an emotional affair with your boss, and I'm the one with the trust issue." I laughed, actually laughed in his face. "An emotional affair? Are you kidding me? This is exactly why I don't tell you about work stuff. You blow everything out of proportion." The argument escalated from there. I accused him of being controlling, insecure, jealous of my success. He tried to explain that he was concerned about boundaries, about respect for our marriage, but all I heard was a man trying to clip my wings. What Kevin didn't know, what I didn't fully acknowledge myself at the time, was that I'd already consulted a divorce attorney. Just to understand my options, I told myself, just to be prepared. I'd been gathering financial information, documenting our arguments, building a case. Not because I definitely wanted out, but because something in me needed an escape hatch. When we finally exhausted ourselves arguing, Kevin asked me point blank, "Do you still want this marriage?" I answered without hesitation. "Yes." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. That night, as Kevin slept beside me, I deleted my conversation history with Dr. Wilson and added a passcode to my phone. Not because I had anything to hide, I told myself, but because I deserved privacy. Because Kevin had broken my trust by snooping. I was getting good at twisting the narrative to make myself the victim. Too good, the weeks that followed existed in a strange limbo. Kevin and I moved around each other like cautious strangers sharing a space. He stopped asking about my day. I stopped pretending to care about his. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with all the things we weren't saying. At work, I found myself sharing more and more about my marital problems. Not with everyone, just with my closest male colleagues. Dr. Matthews would listen sympathetically as I explained how controlling Kevin was becoming. Dr. Patel would assure me that I deserved better. Dr. Wilson would hint that if I were his wife, he'd never take me for granted. I didn't realize then how inappropriate it was to share intimate details of my marriage with these men. How I was turning my marriage into workplace entertainment. How I was betraying Kevin's trust in ways far worse than him checking my messages. One particular Thursday stands out in my memory. I was assisting Dr. Wilson with a procedure when he casually asked, "Late night last night?" I looked at him questioningly. "You seem tired," he explained. "Trouble at home," I sighed dramatically. Kevin's been impossible lately. So moody, so distant, and in the bedroom, I trailed off suggestively. Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "His loss," he said, his gaze lingering on me a beat too long. That little exchange gave me a thrill that I hadn't felt with Kevin in years. I was desired, I was interesting, I mattered. What I didn't consider was how my colleagues might be discussing me when I wasn't around. The screenshots they might be sharing. The way they might see me not as a friend but as entertainment. As potential prey. That evening, I told Kevin I was going out for drinks with the girls. A lie, he didn't question it, though I suspect he knew the truth. Instead of confronting me, he simply nodded and said he'd probably be asleep when I got home. I felt powerful as I walked out the door. I had options. Kevin was just too insecure to handle it. But power built on deception is always fragile, and mine was about to come crashing down around me. The night everything imploded started innocently enough. Kevin and I had been maintaining our Cold War for weeks, communicating only when absolutely necessary. I'd been spending more time with my work friends, coming home later and later, offering no explanations. Kevin had stopped asking, but then Dr. Wilson suggested a group dinner at this upscale new restaurant downtown. The kind of place that would drain Kevin's wallet but that my colleagues wouldn't think twice about. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I invited Kevin to join us. Maybe I wanted to show him off, prove that we were still a normal couple. Maybe I wanted to make him feel out of place among my sophisticated friends. Maybe I just wanted witnesses to what our marriage had become. Whatever my motivation, Kevin agreed. He even wore that blue button-down I used to love, the one that brought out his eyes. For a brief moment as we drove to the restaurant, I remembered why I'd fallen for him all those years ago. Then we arrived, and reality set in. Dr. Wilson, Dr. Matthews, Dr. Patel, and Dr. Lawson were already there, ordering expensive wine and laughing about some patient's ridiculous self-diagnosis. Kevin sat stiffly beside me, clearly feeling out of place but trying his best. I immediately slipped into my work persona. Louder, flirtier, more animated than the woman Kevin knew at home. I barely included him in conversations, and when I did, it was often to use him as the punchline of a joke. Kevin still thinks a colonoscopy and endoscopy are the same thing. I told the table, rolling my eyes. They laughed. Kevin smiled tightly. The real turning point came after our second bottle of wine. Dr. Patel was sharing a story about a patient with intimate dysfunction when I decided to take it a step further. "Speaking of which," I said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "any of you guys want to write a prescription for my husband? We could use some help in the bedroom department." I nudged Kevin playfully, as if he should find this amusing. The table went awkwardly silent for a beat before Dr. Patel laughed. Most common cause of that issue in younger men is usually excessive adult content consumption. Just saying. I saw Kevin's face drain of color. His most private struggle, the one thing he'd never discussed with anyone, but that I'd somehow picked up on, was now dinner conversation. "Thea," he said quietly, a warning in his voice. But I was too far gone, too wrapped up in the attention. What? I asked innocently. These are doctors, they deal with this stuff all the time. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Kevin barely spoke. I drank too much. My colleagues exchanged glances I couldn't read. When the check came, Kevin silently handed over his credit card despite the fact that it would probably max it out. The car ride home was deadly quiet for the first few minutes. Then Kevin spoke, his voice so controlled it scared me a little. What was that? What was what? I countered reflexively. You humiliated me in front of your entire workplace. You shared our private life with a table full of men who already don't respect me. You made me into a joke. You're being dramatic, I said, though part of me knew he wasn't. They're my friends, we joke around, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. You told them I can't satisfy you. You sat there while they speculated about my personal habits. How is that not a big deal? The argument escalated as we drove. Every grievance we'd been harboring came pouring out. His resentment about my male friends, my frustration with his jealousy, his hurt over my spending habits. I pay for everything, Thea, he said. The mortgage, the bills, the insurance, and what do you contribute? Shopping sprees and girls' nights that I'm pretty sure don't involve any actual girls. Well, duh, I spat back. You're the man, don't you want to provide? Isn't that your job? I saw him flinch and I knew I'd hit a nerve. The provider role was something he took seriously, a point of pride, and I'd just thrown it back in his face as an expectation and obligation. That's not what marriage is supposed to be, he said quietly. It's supposed to be a partnership. But I'm alone in this, aren't I? I have been for years. I started to argue, but he cut me off. You want to know what hurts the most? He continued. It's not even the disrespect or the lying, it's that you're having fun with everyone except me. Your doctors, your work friends, they get your smile, your laughter, your energy. I get whatever's left over, which lately has been nothing. We pulled into our driveway, but neither of us made a move to get out of the car. You're just jealous because I have options, I said finally. Because other men find me attractive and interesting. You can't handle a woman who has choices. Kevin looked at me for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. You're right, he said finally. I can't handle this anymore. I'm done competing for my own wife's attention. He got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving me sitting there, my righteous indignation slowly giving way to an unfamiliar feeling of dread. Inside, I found Kevin pulling a suitcase from our closet. What are you doing? I asked, panic rising in my throat. What does it look like? He replied, methodically placing folded shirts into the case. I'm leaving. Don't be ridiculous, I said, trying to sound dismissive rather than desperate. Where would you even go? My brother's. He has a spare room. Kevin continued packing, not meeting my eyes. Over one stupid dinner, one joke that didn't land, you're overreacting. He stopped then and looked at me directly. This isn't about tonight, Thea. Tonight was just the final straw. This is about years of you making me feel like I'm not enough, like I'm some placeholder until something better comes along. That's not true, I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? He challenged. When was the last time you treated me with respect? When was the last time you were actually happy to see me? When was the last time you chose me over them? I had no answer. Kevin zipped up his suitcase. I hope your options make you happy, he said and walked out the door. I stood there frozen, certain he would come back. This was just a dramatic exit, a power play. He'd cool off and return and we'd have another argument and eventually things would go back to normal. But he didn't come back. Not that night, not the next day. I called in sick to work, unwilling to face my colleagues after what had happened. Instead, I texted Dr. Matthews, who had always been the most flirtatious with me. His response was immediate and predictable. He offered to come over to check on me. When he arrived, there was no pretense of friendship. We barely spoke before ending up in my marital bed. It was exciting, forbidden, and completely empty. Afterward, as he quickly dressed to leave, I realized this had always been his only interest in me. So, Dr. Matthews said, checking his watch, I should probably get going. I've got patients in an hour. You could call in, I suggested, trying to sound playful rather than desperate. Say you're running late. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can't do that, but this was fun. We should do it again sometime. The way he said it made it clear we wouldn't. As the door closed behind him, I felt a hollowness spreading through my chest. This was what I'd risked my marriage for. This was the exciting option that had seemed so appealing from a distance. Over the next few days, I discovered how quickly options can disappear. Dr. Matthews stopped responding to my texts after our encounter. At work, there was an awkward distance from the other doctors. Only Dr. Wilson maintained his interest, but his approach became more crudely direct, suggesting we grab a hotel room sometime, since he'd heard good things. I was stunned to learn that Dr. Matthews had shared details of our encounter with the others. The realization that I had been a topic of their private conversations, that my marriage problems had been their entertainment, was humiliating. A week after Kevin left, Dr. Lawson approached me in the break room. "I owe you an apology," he said awkwardly. "We all do. The way we've acted, it wasn't right. Most of us have been uncomfortable with how things evolved, but nobody spoke up." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I knew. "The joke at dinner about your husband, the way we've all encouraged your behavior. It wasn't professional or decent. Your husband seems like a good guy who deserves better." His words stung with truth. I wanted to defend myself, to say that they had been the ones pursuing me, but I knew that wasn't entirely accurate. I had cultivated this attention. I had invited it. I had used it to fill the emptiness I refused to acknowledge in my marriage. That night, I tried calling Kevin again. It went straight to voicemail, as it had every time I'd tried since he left. I told myself he was being childish, that he was punishing me, but deep down, I knew he was simply protecting himself from more hurt. 2 weeks after Kevin walked out, divorce papers arrived. I panicked and called his brother's house, playing the abandoned wife. "Brian, please," I begged when he answered. "I need to talk to Kevin. This is all a huge misunderstanding." "He doesn't want to talk to you, Thea," Brian said, his voice cold. "And frankly, I don't blame him. You don't understand," I insisted. "He's blowing this way out of proportion. I made one stupid joke at a dinner and he just left." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Is that really what you think happened?" Brian finally asked. "One joke. Kevin's been miserable for years. He's tried everything to make you happy, to be enough for you, and you've treated him like garbage." "That's not fair," I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. "You know what's not fair? Watching my brother break himself trying to build a life with someone who clearly doesn't want it. The joke at dinner was just the last straw, Thea. He's done, and you need to accept that." When I hung up, I felt like I was seeing my marriage clearly for the first time, and the picture wasn't flattering. I'd been so focused on what Kevin wasn't giving me that I'd never stopped to think about what I wasn't giving him. Next, I tried calling Kevin's parents, hoping they might be more sympathetic. His mother listened politely before saying, "Thea, we've watched for years as you've belittled our son. Did you think we didn't see it? Did you think he never talked to us?" Reality came crashing down as I realized my carefully constructed narrative had never fooled anyone except perhaps myself. I signed the divorce papers 3 days later. We didn't have many assets to split. The house had been mostly paid for by Kevin, but he didn't want it. He just wanted out, cleanly and quickly. I kept the house, but soon realized I could barely afford the mortgage on my own. At work, things had deteriorated further. The easy camaraderie I'd once enjoyed was gone. The male doctors maintained a professional distance, and I noticed the other medical assistants watching me with a mixture of pity and judgment. I'd become that woman, the one who throws away her marriage for attention, only to end up with nothing. One afternoon, I overheard 2 nurses talking in the supply closet, not realizing I was on the other side of the shelves. "Did you hear Matthews actually slept with her right after her husband left?" One whispered. "Gross," the other replied. "Those guys have been passing her around in their group chat for months, sharing her texts, making bets on who'd get her first. And she thought they actually liked her," the first one said, laughing. "As if any of them would leave their wives for the office homewrecker." I slipped out without them noticing, my face burning with shame. This was how my colleagues saw me, not as the vibrant, desirable woman I'd imagined, but as a joke, a cautionary tale. That night, I looked around the empty house that had once been our home. Kevin's presence lingered everywhere. The coffee mug he always used still in the dish rack, the dent in the couch where he used to sit, the shower set to his preferred temperature. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Who could I call? Who was actually my friend? My finger hovered over my mother's name, but I couldn't bring myself to dial. She'd been feeding me toxic advice for years, encouraging me to treat my marriage like a power game instead of a partnership. I opened the dating apps I downloaded in a moment of defiance after Kevin left. My inbox was full of crude messages from men looking for hookups. Nothing substantive, nothing real. These were my options now. Men who saw me as temporary entertainment, not as someone to build a life with. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine Kevin's perspective. How it must have felt to work all day, only to come home to a wife who was always on her phone, texting other men. How it must have hurt to try to connect with me, only to be met with indifference or irritation. How humiliating it must have been to sit at that dinner table while I made him the butt of my jokes. I've been a terrible wife, I whispered to the empty room. The realization didn't bring relief, only a profound sense of loss. I'd thrown away something real and valuable for the illusion of something better. I'd mistaken attention for respect, desire for love. 3 months after Kevin left, I ran into his sister at the grocery store. I almost turned around and walked the other way, but she spotted me before I could escape. "Thea," she said, her voice cool but not hostile. "Melissa," I nodded. "How are you?" "I'm fine. We're all fine." I wanted to ask about Kevin but couldn't bring myself to say his name. "He's seeing someone," Melissa said, apparently reading my mind. "She's nice, normal, appreciates him." The news hit me harder than I expected. Of course he'd moved on. Of course he'd found someone who could give him what I couldn't. "I'm happy for him," I said, not entirely lying. "He deserves that." Melissa studied me for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "You know, Thea, the sad thing is he would have done anything for you. All you had to do was see his worth." She walked away, leaving me standing next to the frozen foods, tears threatening to spill. That night, I dug out our old photo albums. Pictures from high school, from our wedding, from our early years together. In every image, Kevin looked at me with such open adoration. When had I stopped seeing that? When had I started taking it for granted? There was one photo that particularly gutted me. Kevin and I on a camping trip about 2 years into our marriage. We were sitting by a fire and I was laughing at something he'd said. He was looking at me like I was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. I remembered that trip. I remembered feeling so connected to him, so certain that we'd grow old together. What had changed? When had I started thinking I deserved more? When had better become the enemy of good? The truth was uncomfortable but unavoidable. I'd changed. Not because Kevin wasn't enough, but because I'd let my insecurities and my mother's warped view of relationships convince me that marriage was about power, not partnership. I turned Kevin's steady love into a weakness rather than recognizing it as the gift it was. 6 months after our separation, the divorce was finalized. I maintained publicly that Kevin just couldn't handle me, that I was better off, that I was enjoying my freedom. But at night, alone in our house that I could barely afford, scrolling through dating apps full of men looking for hookups rather than connection, I wondered about the choices I'd made. The options I was so proud of turned out to be illusions. The attention I craved came with a price I never calculated. And the man who loved me despite my flaws, who would have given me everything if I'd only valued it, was gone for good. I still don't know if I could have done things differently, if I'm capable of being the kind of partner a marriage requires, if I'll ever find someone who looks at me the way Kevin once did. All I know is that having options means nothing if you choose the wrong ones. And I'm still not ready to admit that might be exactly what I did. One morning, I woke up to a notification that Kevin had changed his relationship status on social media. In a relationship with Elise Morgan. There was a picture of them together, his arm around a pretty brunette with kind eyes and a genuine smile. They were at some outdoor concert, both looking relaxed and happy. I scrolled through the comments. Congratulations from friends and family. Heart emojis from Melissa. Even a surprisingly warm message from his mother. "She's a lucky girl to have found you, Kevin. So happy to see you smiling again." I closed the app and set my phone down, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. This wasn't jealousy, I told myself. This was regret. This was the knowledge that I'd had something real and squandered it for something that turned out to be fake. At work, things had settled into an uncomfortable routine. The doctors maintained a professional distance. Dr. Matthews avoided eye contact entirely. Dr. Wilson had moved on to flirting with a new nurse, recycling the same lines he'd once used on me. I'd started looking for a new job. Not just because of the awkwardness at the clinic, but because I needed something more. Something that felt like growth rather than escape. I'd applied to a hospital across town, offering slightly better pay and a fresh start. In moments of painful honesty, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, I admitted to myself that I'd been looking for validation in all the wrong places. The problem had never been Kevin. It had been me, trying to fill some emptiness inside that no amount of male attention could satisfy. I thought about texting Kevin sometimes, just to say I was sorry, that I understood now what I'd thrown away. But what would be the point? He had moved on. He was happy. Opening old wounds would only serve my need for closure, not his. Instead, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Rivera didn't judge me when I laid out the whole ugly story. She just nodded and asked gentle but probing questions. Why had I felt the need for constant validation? Why had I been so desperate for options? What was I really looking for? It sounds like you never felt secure in your own worth, she suggested during one session. So you sought confirmation of it from multiple sources. The more men who wanted you, the more valuable you felt. But that's so superficial, I protested. Is it, or is it human? We all want to feel valued. The question is, why didn't Kevin's valuation feel like enough? I didn't have an answer for that, not yet. But for the first time, I was actually looking for one, rather than just looking for my next source of validation. One night, about 7 months after Kevin left, I found myself writing him a letter that I knew I'd never send. The words poured out of me, unfiltered and raw in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. Dear Kevin, I wrote, I don't expect you to read this, and maybe it's better if you don't. This isn't about trying to get you back or making excuses for what I did. This is just me finally being honest with you and with myself. I was wrong, not just about one thing, but about everything. I treated our marriage like it was temporary, like you were disposable. I took all the love and stability you offered and threw it back in your face because it wasn't exciting enough. Because I was too immature to recognize what real love looks like. You deserved a wife who saw your worth, who cherished your kindness, who didn't need constant validation from other men to feel complete. You deserved someone who understood that love isn't about games or power or keeping someone on their toes. It's about partnership, about choosing each other every day. I didn't do that. I chose my ego. I chose attention. I chose the illusion of options over the reality of what we had. And I lost the best person I've ever known because of it. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I'm writing because I want you to know that I understand now. I see clearly what I threw away. And while it hurts more than I can express to know that someone else will get to build a life with you, I'm genuinely glad you found someone who appreciates you. I hope you're happy, Kevin. I hope she makes you feel valued and respected in all the ways I failed to do. I hope you never doubt your worth again. I'm trying to be better. Not for you because that ship has sailed, but for myself. Maybe someday I'll be the kind of person worthy of the love you offered so freely. Thank you for the years you gave me, even though I didn't deserve them. I'm sorry it took losing you to understand what I had. I folded the letter and placed it in my bedside drawer, knowing it would never reach its intended recipient. But writing it had unlocked something in me, some barrier to honesty that I'd maintained for too long. The next day, I called my mother. Our weekly lunches had become less frequent since the divorce, partly because I couldn't bear her "I told you so" about Kevin not being good enough, when the reality was the exact opposite. Mom, I said when she answered, I need to talk to you about some things. Is everything okay, sweetie? You sound serious. I've been doing a lot of thinking about my marriage, about why it failed. Well, that's obvious, she scoffed. Kevin was never right for you, too boring, too ordinary. You need someone more on your level. That's exactly what we need to talk about, I said firmly. Because you're wrong, Mom, Kevin wasn't the problem, I was. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I listened to your advice for years, I continued. about keeping men on their toes, about how marriage shouldn't be a prison, about how Kevin should be grateful that other men found me attractive. And it was all wrong. It destroyed my marriage. Althea, I was just trying to help you, my mother protested. I didn't want you to make the same mistakes I did, settling for a man who took me for granted. But that's just it, Mom. Dad didn't take you for granted. You just convinced yourself he did because he wasn't exciting enough. Kevin didn't take me for granted either. He loved me steadily and completely. And I threw it away because I thought I deserved better. But better than what? Better than someone who works hard and keeps his promises and treats me with respect. What exactly was I holding out for? My mother was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted. I thought I was protecting you. I know you did, I said, softening. But we were both wrong, and now I have to live with the consequences of that. After hanging up, I felt lighter somehow. Not happier exactly, but clearer. Numbing the toxic beliefs that had guided my actions was the first step toward changing them. I'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rivera, who didn't judge me when I laid out the whole ugly story. She just nodded and asked gentle but probing questions. Why had I felt the need for constant validation? Why had I been so desperate for options? What was I really looking for? It sounds like you never felt secure in your own worth, she suggested during one session. So you sought confirmation of it from multiple sources. The more men who wanted you, the more valuable you felt. But that's so superficial, I protested. Is it, or is it human? We all want to feel valued. The question is, why didn't Kevin's valuation feel like enough? I didn't have an answer for that, not yet. But for the first time, I was actually looking for one, rather than just looking for my next source of validation. In therapy, we delved into my childhood, into the messages I'd internalized from watching my parents' marriage, into my fears about becoming invisible as I aged. Dr. Rivera helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, connections between my mother's advice and my own destructive behavior. You know, she said during one particularly tough session, it's actually brave to admit that you were wrong. Many people go their whole lives blaming others for their unhappiness. I don't feel brave, I confessed. I feel like an idiot who threw away the best thing in her life because she was too stupid to recognize it. That's shame talking, Dr. Rivera noted. And while some guilt is appropriate given your actions, shame isn't helpful. It keeps you stuck. So what do? I asked. How do I move forward? You start by forgiving yourself, she said simply. Not because you deserve it, but because you need it to grow. And then you take the lessons from this experience and apply them to becoming a better person. Forgiveness seemed impossible. How could I forgive myself for what I'd done to Kevin? For the humiliation I'd subjected him to? For the years of small cruelties that had eroded his confidence and our connection? But slowly, painfully, I began to try. Not because I deserved it, as Dr. Rivera said, but because the alternative was to remain stuck in a cycle of self-loathing that helped no one, least of all the people I'd hurt. 9 months after our divorce was finalized, I got the job at the hospital. It meant a fresh start, away from the memories and awkwardness at the clinic. My last day, Dr. Lawson stopped by my station as I was packing up my things. I heard you're moving on to Memorial, he said. News travels fast, I replied, not meeting his eyes. It's a good move. Fresh start and all that. I nodded, continuing to empty my drawer. Listen, Thea, he said, shifting uncomfortably. I wanted to apologize again for my part in everything that happened. The jokes, the flirting, the way we all behaved, it wasn't right and I should have been better. I looked up, surprised by his sincerity. Thank you, I said, but I was an active participant in all of it. I have to own that. He nodded. Still. I'm sorry. As he walked away, I felt a small weight lift. Not because his apology erased what had happened, but because it acknowledged it. It made it real rather than just another thing I'd twisted in my mind to absolve myself of responsibility. My first day at Memorial was refreshingly anonymous. No one knew me or my history. No one had witnessed my marriage imploding or my subsequent humiliation. I was just Thea Morno, a competent medical assistant with good references. I kept to myself, mostly friendly but professional. No flirting, no oversharing, no blurring of boundaries. I went home each night to my apartment, the house having been sold to cover debts, and focused on building a life that wasn't defined by my relationship status or by male attention. It wasn't easy. There were moments when a doctor would smile at me a certain way, and I'd feel that old familiar pull, that desire to be special, to be desired. But I'd recognize it now for what it was. Not a path to fulfillment, but a distraction from the real work of becoming whole on my own. 1 year to the day after Kevin walked out, I found myself driving by our old house. The new owners had painted it a soft yellow, planted different flowers in the garden. It looked like a happy home, which was more than I could say for what it had been in those final months with me and Kevin. On an impulse, I drove to Brian's neighborhood. I had no intention of knocking on his door or trying to see Kevin, who probably didn't even live there anymore. I just wanted to be in a place that reminded me of him, to sit with my regret and acknowledge it fully. As I cruised slowly down Bryan Street, I saw them. Kevin and the brunette from the social media photos, Elise, walking hand in hand toward his brother's house. They were laughing about something, their bodies angled toward each other in that unmistakable way of two people genuinely connected. I slowed my car not to spy but because the sight of him happy with someone else knocked the wind out of me. He looked good, healthy. His smile reached his eyes in a way it hadn't in the later years of our marriage, as if sensing my presence, Kevin glanced up. Our eyes met through my car window, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. There was no anger in his gaze, no bitterness. Just a flicker of recognition, and then a small, almost imperceptible nod. I nodded back, tears blurring my vision, and drove away. That brief exchange contained more closure than any conversation could have provided. He had moved on, he was okay. And in a strange way, that knowledge helped me begin to forgive myself. That night, I wrote in my journal something Dr. Rivera had encouraged me to try. A letter to my younger self, the high school girl who had first fallen for Kevin. Dear young Thea, I wrote, you're about to meet a boy in chemistry class who will change your life. He's kind and steady, and he will love you completely. This is both a blessing and a challenge, because love like that demands reciprocation. It asks you to be honest and present and to choose him every day, not just when it's exciting. You won't understand the value of what he offers. You'll confuse stability with boredom, dedication with weakness. You'll listen to voices that tell you that you deserve more, better, different, when what you really need is to recognize the treasure right in front of you. I can't go back and shake some sense into you. I can't make you see what I see now. All I can do is promise that I'll learn from your mistakes, that I'll honor the lessons from your failed marriage by becoming someone worthy of the love you were so carelessly given. Kevin deserved better than what you gave him. And now, the best thing you can do is make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Become someone who understands the difference between attention and respect, between excitement and happiness, between options and real choice. It's too late for you and Kevin, but it's not too late for you. I closed my journal, a sense of determination replacing the regret that had been my constant companion. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to become the person I should have been all along. 6 months later, I found myself tentatively entering the dating world again. Not through apps or bars, but through a book club a coworker had invited me to join. There I met Daniel, a high school English teacher with kind eyes and an easy laugh. Our first date was coffee, simple and low pressure. I was different this time, more honest, more present. When he asked about my past relationships, I didn't spin a narrative that cast me as the victim. I told him the truth. I was married for 8 years, I said. It ended because I was immature and selfish and didn't recognize what I had until it was gone. He seemed surprised by my candor. That's pretty harsh self-assessment. It's accurate, I replied. I've done a lot of work to understand what went wrong and my part in it. I'm still working on it, actually. That's rare, he said. Most people just blame their ex and move on. I tried that, I admitted. It didn't work so well. Daniel and I took things slowly. No rushing into physical intimacy, no love bombing, no games. Just two adults getting to know each other, building trust incrementally. It was different from any relationship I'd ever had, including my marriage to Kevin. I didn't check my phone constantly for validation. I didn't need Daniel to compete with other men for my attention. I didn't try to keep him on his toes or create drama for excitement. Instead, I focused on being authentic, on listening, on being the kind of partner I wish I'd been to Kevin. Will Daniel and I last? I don't know. What I do know is that I'm approaching this relationship with a completely different mindset. I don't see him as just another option in a sea of possibilities. I see him as a person, complex and whole, offering a genuine connection that deserves respect. As for Kevin, I heard through mutual friends that he and Elise got engaged. The news brought a bittersweet pang, but not the jealousy or resentment I might have expected. Instead, I felt a quiet gladness that he had found someone who could love him the way he deserved. In my darkest moments, I still wonder if I'm capable of the kind of love that sustains a lifetime. If the selfish girl who threw away her marriage has really changed or just learned to hide her worst impulses better. If I deserve a second chance at happiness when I so carelessly discarded my first. But then I remembered Dr. Rivera's words about shame versus growth, about the courage it takes to face your mistakes head on instead of running from them. And I choose to believe that my regret can be transformed into something meaningful, something redemptive. I told Kevin he couldn't handle a woman with options. The truth was, I couldn't handle the responsibility of real love. I confused attention with respect, desire with devotion. I mistook Kevin's steady presence for something I could take for granted rather than the gift it truly was. Now I'm the one with no choices left when it comes to my first marriage. That chapter is closed for good. But I do have a choice about who I become moving forward. I can let my mistakes define me, or I can let them refine me. Today, I choose refinement. Tomorrow will be another choice. And the day after that. One decision at a time, I'm becoming someone who understands that real options aren't about having multiple people desire you. They're about the freedom to choose what kind of person you want to be. And finally, after all this time, I'm choosing wisely. 2 years after Kevin walked out of our house and my life, I found myself standing in the back of a small chapel, clutching a small gift bag. I hadn't planned to come. When the invitation arrived in my mailbox 3 months earlier, my first instinct had been to throw it away. Not out of bitterness, but because I couldn't imagine Kevin would actually want me there. But accompanying the formal invitation was a handwritten note from Elise. Thea, it read, I know this is unconventional, but Kevin and I both feel it would be meaningful to have you there. Not to dwell on the past, but to acknowledge that all our experiences shape who we become. Kevin is the man I love today because of his entire journey, including the years he shared with you. If this feels too uncomfortable, we completely understand. But know that the invitation is sincere. I'd stared at that note for days, reading it over and over, trying to decipher any hidden meaning or passive aggression. But there was none. Just a remarkable generosity of spirit from the woman who now held the heart I had carelessly discarded. And so I found myself at their wedding, hanging back, watching as guests filed into their seats. I recognized some faces. Kevin's family, old mutual friends. I kept my distance, not wanting to create any awkwardness on their special day. Brian spotted me first. Kevin's brother approached with a cautious smile. You came, he said, surprise evident in his voice. Is that okay? I asked, suddenly uncertain. The invitation said no RSVP necessary, but maybe I should have confirmed. No, it's fine, Brian assured me. Kevin will be glad you're here. He hesitated. You look good, Thea, healthy. Thanks, I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I am healthier than I've been in a long time in all the ways that matter. Brian nodded, seeming to understand what I meant. That's good to hear. As guests settled into their seats and the music began to play, I remained standing at the back. This wasn't my moment to claim a front row seat. I was here as an observer, a witness to the happiness of someone I had once promised to cherish. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. When Kevin saw Elise walking down the aisle, the look on his face made my breath catch. It was pure joy, unmarred by doubt or reservation. I recognized that look. He had once looked at me that way, back when we were young and full of hope, before I started taking his love for granted. Their vows were personal and heartfelt. Kevin promised to choose Elise every day, to never let her doubt her place in his heart. Elise promised to respect and cherish him, to see his kindness as strength rather than weakness. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks, not from jealousy or regret, but from the simple recognition of something authentic and true. After the ceremony, I planned to slip away quietly. I'd paid my respects, witnessed their commitment. There was no need to impose my presence on their celebration. But as I turned to leave, I heard his voice. Thea. Kevin stood a few feet away, handsome in his suit, his expression open but guarded. Congratulations, I said, meaning it completely. It was a beautiful ceremony. Thank you for coming, he replied. It means a lot to both of us. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice breaking. Are you doing okay? He asked, and the genuine concern in his question nearly undid me. Even now, after everything, his first instinct was kindness. I'm good, I said. Really good, actually. I've been doing a lot of work on myself. I heard you took a job at Memorial. Yes, almost a year ago now. It's been a fresh start. An awkward silence fell between us, years of history pooling in the space of those few seconds. Kevin, I know this isn't the time or place, but I need to say something. I finally spoke. I'm sorry. Not in a way that asks anything of you, but in a way that acknowledges the truth. I treated you terribly. I took everything you offered and gave so little in return, and I want you to know that I understand that now. He watched me steadily, his expression softening slightly. I've forgiven you, Thea, he said quietly. A long time ago. Fresh tears sprang to my eyes. Thank you, I'm still working on forgiving myself. That's usually the harder part, he acknowledged with a small smile. Elise appeared then, radiant in her wedding dress. Instead of the awkwardness I expected, she greeted me with a warm hug. I'm so glad you came, she said, with such genuine warmth that I couldn't help but hug her back. Congratulations, I managed. You make a beautiful bride. Thank you, she beamed, looking up at Kevin with such love that any lingering doubts I had about their match dissolved instantly. This was right. They were right together in a way that Kevin and I had never quite managed to be. We should get back to our guests, Kevin said, taking his new wife's hand. Of course, I nodded. Be happy, both of you. As I watched them walk away, I felt something settle within me. A chapter truly closing, not with bitterness or resentment, but with acceptance and, remarkably, peace. Outside the chapel, I took a deep breath of fresh air. Daniel was waiting for me at home, having understood why this was something I needed to do alone. Our relationship had deepened over the past year, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than games or power struggles. For the first time since my divorce, I felt hopeful about my future. Not because I had replaced Kevin with Daniel, but because I had finally begun to understand what real love looked like. What it asked of you. What it gave in return. 3 months after Kevin and Elise's wedding, Daniel and I were having dinner at my apartment when he brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. You know, you've told me a lot about what went wrong in your marriage, he said carefully. But I'm curious about what was right, at least in the beginning. I set down my fork, considering his question. It wasn't asked from a place of jealousy or insecurity. Daniel had always been comfortable discussing my past, recognizing that it had shaped who I was now. What was right? I repeated, thinking back. Kevin made me feel safe, not in a boring or stifling way, but in the sense that I never doubted his commitment. He was consistent, he kept his promises, and he saw me, the real me, not just the version I presented to the world. Daniel nodded, encouraging me to continue. He was my biggest cheerleader. When I failed organic chemistry the first time, he stayed up all night helping me study for the makeup exam. When I decided to switch from nursing to becoming a medical assistant, he never made me feel like I was settling or giving up. He just supported whatever I needed. He sounds like a good man, Daniel said. He is, I agreed. But at the time, I couldn't see the value in what he offered. I was looking for excitement, for drama, for the kind of attention that makes you feel powerful in the moment but leaves you empty afterward. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. And now, what are you looking for now? I looked at him, this thoughtful man who had entered my life when I least expected it, who had been patient with my baggage and my hesitations. Authenticity, I said finally. Connection, the courage to be vulnerable and the wisdom to recognize what matters. I'm looking for someone who makes me want to be better, not because I'm afraid of losing them, but because they inspire that in me. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a softening, a certainty. I love you, Thea, he said simply. Not despite your past, but including it. All the parts of you, even the ones you're not proud of, they make you who you are today. It was the first time he'd said those words, and they didn't frighten me as I might have expected. Instead, they felt like coming home. I love you too, I replied, the words emerging easily, naturally. And I promised to never take that for granted. 6 months after that conversation, Daniel and I moved in together. Unlike my rushed marriage to Kevin, we were taking our time, building a foundation based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. I continued my therapy with Dr. Rivera, not because I was in crisis, but because I valued the ongoing work of becoming more self-aware, more intentional in my choices. During one session, she asked a question that made me pause. What would you say has been the most valuable lesson from your divorce? I considered this carefully. That love isn't something you acquire or possess, I finally said. It's something you nurture and protect. It's a choice you make every day, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Dr. Rivera smiled. That's a hard-earned wisdom, Thea. Many people never get there. I just wish I hadn't hurt someone else so deeply in the process of learning it, I admitted. That's understandable. But regret can be a teacher too if we let it be. And she was right. My regrets about my marriage had shaped me, humbled me, opened me to a depth of self-reflection I might never have reached otherwise. My mother and I had established a new kind of relationship as well. After our confrontation about her toxic advice, we had several honest conversations about her own marriage, about the insecurities that had driven her to push me toward a defensive, power-based approach to relationships. I really thought I was protecting you, she confessed during one such talk. I didn't want you to feel taken for granted the way I did. But Mom, I pointed out gently, maybe Dad wasn't taking you for granted. Maybe that was just your perception based on your own fears. She had been silent for a long moment before nodding slowly. That's possible, she acknowledged. Your father was a good man, steadier than I probably deserved. It wasn't a complete transformation. Years of patterns don't change overnight, but it was a start. A recognition that perhaps we had both been operating from a flawed understanding of what love should look like. 3 years after my divorce, I ran into Dr. Lawson at a medical conference. We chatted briefly, professionally, both of us acknowledging without words how far removed we were from the unhealthy dynamics of the past. You seem different, he observed. More grounded. I am, I confirmed. Life has a way of teaching you what matters, sometimes through hard lessons. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you found your way through. Not everyone does. Later that evening, I called Daniel from my hotel room, missing his steady presence, the ease we had developed together. How was the conference? He asked. Educational, I replied. In more ways than one, I ran into someone from my old clinic and it reminded me of how much has changed, how much I've changed. For the better, Daniel said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Definitely for the better, I agreed. Though it wasn't an easy road. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about the concept of options, that word that had played such a pivotal role in my downfall. I had told Kevin he couldn't handle a woman with options, flaunting the attention of other men as proof of my value. But I had fundamentally misunderstood what true options meant. Real options weren't about having multiple admirers or keeping someone on edge about your commitment. Real options were about the freedom to choose who you wanted to be, what values you wanted to embody, what kind of relationship you wanted to build. In losing everything, I had gained a clarity I might never have found otherwise. The knowledge that attention is not the same as respect, that excitement is not the same as happiness, that real love doesn't diminish your freedom, it enhances it by giving you a secure base from which to grow. On the fourth anniversary of the day Kevin walked out, I wrote one final letter that would never be sent. Dear Kevin, it began. Today marks 4 years since you found the courage to walk away from a relationship that was diminishing rather than enhancing your life. I want to thank you for that courage, not just for your sake, but for mine. Because in losing you, I found myself. In facing the consequences of my choices, I discovered what truly matters. I saw you and Elise at the farmer's market last weekend with your little one. He has your eyes, that same thoughtful gaze that I once took for granted. You didn't see me, and I didn't approach, not wanting to intrude on your family moment. But watching you with your son, the gentle way you held him, the pride in your expression, filled me with a deep gladness that life has given you everything you deserve. I hope you know that I wish you nothing but happiness. That the lessons of our failed marriage have transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. That the pain we both experienced wasn't wasted, at least not for me. I told you once that you couldn't handle a woman with options. The truth is, I was the one who couldn't handle the responsibility of real love, of showing up every day with integrity and gratitude. I confused attention with respect, desire with devotion. I mistook your steady presence for something I could take for granted rather than the precious gift it truly was. I'm sharing my life now with someone who knows my whole story, my failures and regrets, and loves me anyway. Someone who inspires me to be better, not out of fear of losing him, but out of respect for what we're building together. I'd like to think that if you and I had met at this point in our lives, things might have been different. But perhaps everything unfolded exactly as it needed to for both of us to find our way. Thank you for the love you offered so freely, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for the hard lessons that came with losing you. And thank you for moving forward into a life that brings you joy, showing me that healing is possible, that pain isn't permanent, that we all have the capacity to begin again. With gratitude and wishes for your continued happiness, Thea. I folded the letter and put it away with the others I'd written over the years, a chronicle of my journey from self-absorbed entitlement to something approaching wisdom. These letters were for me, a reminder of how far I'd come and how far I still had to go. Daniel and I were talking about marriage now, not rushing but moving steadily in that direction. When the time came, it would be a different kind of commitment than my first. One entered with eyes wide open, with a full understanding of what it meant to truly choose someone day after day, through all the ordinary moments that make up a life together. I told Kevin he couldn't handle a woman with options. Now I understand that I was the one who never truly had options because I didn't know what was worth choosing. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, confusing attention with worth, novelty with happiness. True freedom came only when I lost everything. When I was forced to look in the mirror and reckon with the person I had become. When I had to rebuild from scratch, not a life based on external validation, but one rooted in integrity, in authenticity, in the courage to be vulnerable. I'm not the woman I was when Kevin walked out the door, suitcase in hand, done competing for his own wife's attention. That woman died a necessary death, making room for someone more worthy of the love she hopes to give and receive. The options I once prized turned out to be illusions, mirages that disappeared when I reached for them. The attention I craved was shallow and fleeting. The excitement I sought left me empty and alone. Now I understand that the most precious option we have is the freedom to change, to grow, to become more fully ourselves. To choose love not as a trophy or a game, but as a daily practice of seeing and being seen, of showing up with our whole hearts, of treating another's trust as the sacred gift it truly is. I told Kevin he couldn't handle a woman with options. I was wrong about so many things. But perhaps in losing him, in facing the painful truth of my own limitations, I found the only option that truly matters. The choice to become someone capable of real love, someone worthy of the very thing I once so carelessly threw away.